One of the questions that I'm asked most often is what tools would you suggest for data exploration? Could be for analysis, could be for visualization, but this is consistently one of the most common questions that I've been asked. My simple answer is it doesn't matter. A regular analyst creates normal analysis with good tools, but a good analyst is someone who can create good analysis with any tool. It really doesn't matter. You don't need Python. You don't need R. You don't need SAS. You don't need Spark, TensorFlow, whatever the latest buzz is. The best tool is between your ears. Your mind has the ability to craft good analysis and good stories, and that will work with pretty much any tool you have handy. For me personally, I happen to be reasonably good at Excel because I've largely been working with Excel for the last 20 years and PowerPoint as well for that matter. While I am these days working more with Python or R, that's more a function of some of the niche use cases. My first tool, my first go-to choice is typically Excel. Now, can Excel do the kind of things that Python or R can do? The short answer is yes, by and large, yes. It's very easy to assume that these tools are somehow more capable and therefore we need to go to them for good analysis. Whereas the fact is that what's really underutilized is our ability to use these tools. And I'm going to show you some examples of these. In fact, let me start with something that's pretty old. This is a piece that I had created in 2000, almost 18 years ago. And it shows the yield curve across time. This slider, as I move it, so let's start with the year 2001. This is March 8th, 2001. The US Treasury yield curve has an interest rate of about 3.5% for short-term bonds, and then it steadily increases as the bond maturity increases, tapering off for a 10-year bond at around 5%. Now, how did the yield curve change? As I move the slider, you can see that the date is changing on top. Oh, I got the day-month format wrong. This is in the month, day, year format, but you can see that as the dates change, the yield curve is gently flowing down. Now it's stepped up a bit. It's stepping down. It stepped down a fair bit. So now the yields in the US Treasury markets have fallen considerably. This is by around 2003. And they're flattening as well. The long-term yields, in other words, yields for around the 10-year forecast, those seem to be much lower too. Let's step forward. Now the yields are recovering. The longer yield bonds, the longer-term bonds have higher yield, and then that slowly moves back into the shorter yield bonds. And with this, we now have an almost flat curve by 2005, where the yields have stabilized to 4%, and people believe that it's going to stay at 4% right through. So that's about 4 years worth of history of the US Treasury bonds, just mentioned using Excel, or just told through Excel, in which we have one slider that plays an animation. Now, using this kind of data, there have been many interesting stories that we've come up with based on, well, simple analysis. One of the most interesting ones that I was working with was with the Ministry of Education in India, where their question was, tell me what determines a child's marks. And we said, look, let's not go that far. Let's start without even trying to predict a child's marks to look at the descriptive characteristics of the marks distribution. For example, if I take all of the students who scored marks in English, let's arrange their marks from 0 to 100 and plot a simple histogram in Excel that shows how many people scored 0 marks, 1 marks, 2 marks, and so on, all the way up to 100. Now, you see that most people score marks in the middle, around 65%. Very few people score around 100, very few people score around 0. But the anomaly here is that there is a spike at 35, and that is exactly the mark at which students pass. What seems to be happening is that the teachers are taking some of the students who've gotten fairly close to the mark at which they pass, and they scoop them up. They give them bonus marks and say, it's okay, you can pass. Let's make sure you don't fail just because of a few points. But notice that this is inconsistent. There are still some teachers, at least in English, who say, no, you only got 34. I'm not going to let you pass. So at least for English, there's room for prayer. If you're a poor student, just hope that the right kind of teacher corrects your paper. But in social science, you don't need to pray at all. Nobody fails between 30 to 35. These teachers just pick every single person who scored between 30 and 35 and have moved them up to 35 so that they just get through. And between 25 and 30, they use their discretion. Now, the Ministry of Education said, look, we swear we do not have any kind of policy on moderation. Whatever is happening because the teachers are getting together and doing this. And for some reason, the social science teachers seem to have gotten their act together, but the English teachers have not. And you'll find that the same behavior in social science, incidentally, is also exhibited in mathematics. Nobody fails between 30 and 35. And you also see that there is a spike at 100, not just at 35, but also at 100. Now, I've heard a couple of different explanations for this. One is that mathematics is one of those subjects where you can actually determine whether the answer is correct or not. So the teachers don't have a problem when the students have gotten the answers right to give full marks because they can defend it to any board saying that this answer is in fact going to fetch them full marks. The other explanation that I've heard is that mathematics is bimodal, that some students get it, some students don't. And if these students who really get mathematics were to take the exam, they might have scored 105, 110, 120. And what you're seeing is the result of two normal curves, one for the average student and one for the extraordinary student, which would have gone beyond 100. And because we don't give beyond 100, they just squeezed to the 100. They would have scored much more on a tougher paper. I have no idea which explanation is right. But when the Ministry of Education saw this, they said, okay, this is stuff that with our data, we'd never seen before. Not on Excel, not on any other tool. Every time somebody comes to me and says, we really need more powerful tools, I just tell them, look, focus on your technique. Focus on telling stories. Stop complaining about tools. The bulk of the problem is our familiarity with the tools that we have, probably. That may be an inhibitor. But the biggest problem that we have is really that we don't know what story to tell, or we don't know how to tell the story. If you had a good story and you knew how to tell it, paper and pen is enough. Heck, you don't even need paper and pen.